this computer. All right, so welcome everybody to Southern Arizona Against Slavery's first Zoom presentation on slavery in 2020. We thank you all so much for joining us today. This is our first virtual presentation. Maggie and I typically host in person, so this is new for us as much as it is for everybody else. So thank you so much for your flexibility and willingness to be with us this morning. We did advertise this event as an open discussion. So as we go through our slides, and there is lots of information to cover today, please do feel free to participate. What we believe to be the easiest way for us to do that is to either use the raise hand function or type into our chat box so we see those questions pop in. We have Skylar Dickinson here today. She is our secretary on our board of directors for Southern Arizona Against Slavery. So she'll be manning that chat if you want to say hi, Skylar. Hi. So any questions you have or anything that comes up, please do feel free to reach out to Skylar. Being on Zoom and knowing that we are all kind of in our homes or our offices or about our business, if you do need to step out or leave, please feel free to do so. It will not hurt our feelings. And like I said, we are recording this meeting today, so you will be able to access this meeting at a later date on our social media sites and on our website. So I think that's all for housekeeping items today. I'll let Maggie take it away with introductions and a history of SAAS.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. And I'm sorry, since I made you host, I can't screen share either. So I don't know if you want to make me host again.
Sure.
I thought I could.
Let's see.
Or if you just enable me to screen share, you could do that too.
Okay. Do you know where I go for that, Maggie?
I think if you go to my name in the participants and you click more, I don't know if you can say enable me to screen share. I'm just afraid if people come in later, I won't be able to see them, but maybe I can figure out something else.
All right, make host. Okay.
Should I be okay? Okay. So we have entitled this open discussion webinar, Slavery in 2020. And so we are going to be looking at this year so far and how it impacts human trafficking, which there is so much intersectionality. We can't wait to share it with you. Again, my name is Maggie Bellino. I'm the president of Southern Arizona Against Slavery, and I'm just so thankful that you all are here today, that made time in your busy days to join us. We hope that you find this information extremely fruitful and applicable to your lives. Southern Arizona Against Slavery was founded over 10 years ago, actually, by a lawyer and a social worker who were married. And they found that despite ample information to indicate that human trafficking existed in Tucson, there was no one who was providing education on this for the general population, for our community members. So they founded Southern Arizona Against Slavery, again, over 10 years ago, and they have been doing active efforts in the community to provide educational presentations since that time. About 3 years ago, I was going to grad school with one of the founders, and she asked if I wanted to take it over, which I gladly said yes to, as this has always been a topic of interest to me. And Sarah was still on the board at that time. She had been on the board for several years. And so her and I decided, okay, let's do a community needs assessment and see, does the community of Tucson still need education on human trafficking? And we found that overwhelmingly, people still did not understand risk factors, red flags, who to call for help. And so we continued this mission of education. As Sarah said, we typically do these presentations in person. We go wherever the need is. So we've been in university classrooms, community college classrooms, churches, group homes. We literally will go anywhere to provide these free trainings because we believe that this information is so useful to every member of our society. And this is the first time that we're doing it over Zoom. So again, just really glad that you are here to join us for that today, and we'll see how it all goes. So if you don't want to just take it away, Sarah.
Awesome. So we like to start off our presentations with a little background on human trafficking because we know that everyone's kind of at different levels. So for some of you, this may be a review, and for some of you, this may be new information. But we all know that 157 years ago, the Emancipation Proclamation came into effect, which abolished slavery, right? Wrong. What we know now is that there's more slaves today than there ever have been in history, which is a pretty staggering statement when you think about all of the strides we've made for human rights up till 2020. But like Maggie said, 2020 has been an interesting year. So we're going to look at all the different ways that the intersectionalities have occurred for these folks. So there's an estimated 40.3 million victims of human trafficking across the globe. And this is a statistic that we pull from the Polaris Project, which we'll cite a lot in our presentation. They do the most up-to-date research of any organization about human trafficking. Even though this is coming from the Polaris Project, 40.3 million, that number is still questioned. And the reason for that is because human trafficking is really an underground crime, right? Folks that are engaging in it, whether they be the victims of human trafficking or whether they be the perpetrators of human trafficking, this isn't something that's talked about. So these are the best numbers that we have, but a lot of researchers believe that the number is actually much higher because we're only able to get this information when someone comes forward with it. So the average price of a slave around the world is just $90, which is pretty staggering. In the 1800s, when we were engaging in slave trades in this country, the average price of a slave was in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So unfortunately, it is a very cheap way for trafficking victims. The average sex trafficker can earn over $100,000 per girl per year. We do use the term girl here, as girls and women are the most affected by human trafficking, but certainly human trafficking occurs to men as well as non-binary folks. So we might use the term girl throughout the presentation, but please do understand that it affects all genders, all sexes. So the average US sex trafficker can earn $100,000 per victim, which is a pretty staggering number. When you think about other illegal trades that occur, whether that be drug trades or things like that, when you have the resource and you sell it, that is a one-time transaction. Unfortunately, in human trafficking, a transaction can occur multiple times with one female or one victim. So this number, this $100,000 number, can be done and made multiple years in a row, right? So unfortunately, this is all incentivized by money. There's a big financial gain for perpetrators of human trafficking, which is why this happens. And across the globe, this generates $150 billion per year. So again, the financial implications of human trafficking are ginormous, and it is something that will continue because they are making money off of it. But no matter how many slaves we're seeing, whether it be this 40.3 million or one slave is one too many, and that's why we do the work that we do, so we can abolish slavery for good. Okay, so with Southern Arizona Against Slavery, we really focus on two main types of trafficking. We've grouped them here for your reference. The first being sex trafficking, and we have two different types here. We have sex trafficking and child sex trafficking. In a little bit, we'll go over the definitions of sex trafficking and why we do separate sex trafficking from child sex trafficking, but it does have to do with age. So in the next couple of slides, we'll go over that. The second major trafficking that we discuss at SAAS is labor trafficking. And unfortunately, we don't hear quite as much about labor trafficking in the media. And it's as simple as this: sex sells, right? So in the media, you hear a lot more about sex trafficking than labor trafficking, but labor trafficking actually occurs 9 times more frequently than sex trafficking. So it's an issue that's near and dear to our hearts and something that we want to include in all of our presentations. Labor trafficking can be seen in a variety of ways. We have here listed forced labor, labor trafficking, forced child labor, bonded labor or debt bondage, and domestic servitude. Again, we're going to go over some definitions of what those mean, but we want to make sure that we hit on both of these items. Now, that's not to say that there's not different forms of trafficking out there. We also have the unlawful recruitment and use of child soldiers and organ trafficking. These are items that SAAS does not typically go into detail on, but it is something that we're mindful of. And because we're doing this presentation on 2020, one stat that we wanted to throw out there that we just learned is that organ trafficking has seen a huge increase during the pandemic. Folks that are in financial constraints due to being laid off, due to being unemployed, are now seeking other means of making money. And so a lot of folks are starting to sell their organs across the globe to get additional income. So again, we're not going to go into these two today, but it is something that we want to make folks aware of, and something that if it interests you, you can certainly find more information on.
And with anything that we discuss, if you want to learn more information or learn more about our resources, please contact us afterwards and we'd be more than happy to share additional information.
Perfect. So we have a couple of definitions here. People often ask us, what are the federal definitions? If I see somebody that I believe is being trafficked, how do we know that it is in fact trafficking? So I'll just read these definitions to us. Sex trafficking occurs when a commercial sex act by an adult, and this is an important piece, is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or the person induced to perform a commercial sex act has not attained 18 years of age. A really common question that SAAS receives during our presentation is, what about sex work? What about individuals that want to engage in sex work and willingly engage in sex work? So SAAS focuses on human trafficking. So as an organization, we do not have a stance on legalizing sex work. But what we do like to remind folks is anybody under the age of 18 is considered a child, and any type of commercial sex act for money is considered human trafficking. So a lot of times we'll hear stories of survivors that will say, you know, I made a choice to go into sex work or a similar field, but as time gone on, my trafficker or my John, you know, really pulled me into this society, and I realized that I no longer had a choice. So again, sex trafficking occurs with force, fraud, and coercion. And you'll see that again in the definition about labor trafficking. So labor trafficking is defined as the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for labor or services through the use of, again, force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, debt bondage, or slavery. Both of those definitions are what is used when we prosecute folks that are perpetrating human trafficking. And it's also the way that our law enforcement officers can prosecute folks when they do find them out in our communities. Does anyone have any questions about these definitions, or does anything stand out to any of our participants? Okay, we'll move on to the next slide then.
So this is a graphic that we took from the Polaris project again, and this indicates the red dots are the more concentrated and the blue dots are less concentrated. And they're looking at phone calls or text messages received to the human trafficking hotline. These are not confirmed cases of human trafficking. These are just outreach efforts, either by victims or by people who are suspecting cases of trafficking. And so this is the most up-to-date map that they have received within the last year or so. What stands out to our group members today as far as areas of concentration of outreach? If you want to raise your hand or put in the chat, we would love to hear from you as far as what stands out.
Okay, from Barbara, she said she notices that there's a lot of concentration on the coasts.
Yes, we absolutely see these areas of concentration along our coastal lines.
From Autumn, she says, I noticed there's a lot of port cities.
Absolutely, lots of port cities we see. And something, you know, that has stood out to me in years of doing this research is the Midwest and how we have these areas of concentration in these areas. We have learned that transportation on barges or oversight as far as border control has so few restrictions, so many less restrictions than even some of our like coastal areas down here where we know there's a lot of you know, movement from different countries. And so we do see higher amounts of trafficking because of just weak laws is really what it comes down to, and lack of oversight. So traffickers, we know, are extremely intelligent individuals. Again, they're in this for a high amount of profit. So they take advantage of areas in our country that have weaker laws or weaker oversight.
Two things that have always stood out to me, Maggie, and I know we've talked about this before. Skylar Dickinson, actually, when she first joined, the first thing she noticed, she said every single state in the US is represented on this map. So I think historically folks have thought that, of course, there's going to be trafficking in New York City. Of course, there's going to be trafficking in Los Angeles. But you have states up here that might surprise some of you, right? We have representation in the Dakotas. We have representation in Nebraska. We have reports coming in from across the country. So this really is an issue that impacts everybody. Our organization is called Southern Arizona Against Slavery, but really we're talking about every state in our nation, and we're talking about a global impact. Another thing that we often hear, being on the border of Mexico, folks often say, well, I imagine there's lots going on at the border of Mexico. And if you're looking at this map, we do see some areas along the border, but I think breaking down that myth and understanding that this is not an issue outside of our country, this can be an issue inside of our country, and it's not just seen at our borders, is a really important point to make.
We also like to distinguish between human smuggling, which does require the transportation of people in an illegal way without documentation, versus human trafficking actually does not require any form of physical movement. And then the other point that we like to, sometimes people mention or we like to point out ourselves is there's a hotspot right here in Southern Arizona. We are marked on this map, and that is one of the reasons that Sarah, Skylar, our board members, and I continue the work that we do, because we undoubtedly are on this map. And so we feel that we do have an obligation to be talking about this, to be advocating for laws that support victim rights, because we know that it's occurring in our area. I see that someone joined the waiting room, so I'm going to admit them. Joan, do you have a question?
Are you going to give us some information on human trafficking in Tucson besides what you just did?
Yeah, there is very little research on Tucson specific facts and figures related to human trafficking. There is a professor through Arizona State University named Dr. Dominique Sepowitz, and she has put a lot of money into, or had promoted the university to put money into funding research to better understand specific numbers in Southern Arizona. So she has come out with a couple research studies, and we can absolutely talk more about that maybe after at the end or something like that. If you would like, Joan, I can let you know what her research indicates. But unfortunately, like Sarah was talking about earlier, this is by nature a hidden crime. So it is so hard to get hard data, good data on what is really occurring for us. And so that's why maps like these, where we have calls of concern or calls of question regarding more information for resources, is kind of what we are going off of, because the confirmed cases, the decision to actually leave a trafficker and seek help is a huge step for someone who has been victimized for years and years.
I came on today hoping I would hear more about human trafficking in Tucson. It seems as though there hasn't been much in the news lately. I'm talking about the last couple of years, and it just seems as though it's disappeared. I know there was a conference that was scheduled about a year ago, and it was canceled because of lack of attendance, and which was very disappointing. Mm-hmm. I know that the governor's task force is doing a whole lot in Phoenix, but I happen to be the chair of a human trafficking committee for the League of Women Voters, and I am amazed at how little we are hearing about Tucson. You can read their minutes. It's all up in the Phoenix and Maricopa, and I just am very concerned about what's happening here. And it seems as though all information has gone into a black hole lately. So I'm hoping you will talk more about Tucson too. I didn't know this was a Human Trafficking 101 class, but I'm going to stick with you and see what you have to say. But I really am more concerned about your insight into, I've talked to Jennifer. I know that it still is here. We know all the red flags and things, but really I would like to know your insight into human trafficking in Tucson.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Joan. At the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that the first piece is kind of more of a human trafficking 101, as we do have folks from all scopes of practice here. As we get into the presentation, you'll see more specifics. And certainly myself, Skylar, Maggie, Terry's on the call with us, can give a little bit more insight into our experiences here in Tucson and some of the things that are going on. And with that said, Terry actually has some comments in our chat. She states, Saturn continues to do Zoom meetings with Tucson Police Department, Human Trafficking Lead, and Tammy with Homeland Security. And for those of you that don't know, Saturn is our local Tucson-based coalition of folks involved in human trafficking. She says, our next Zoom meeting is October 8th at 9 a.m. If you would like to join us, you are welcome. We need more outreach teams, and with the rescue of these girls, if you would like to join our team on outreach, we could definitely use the help. We have no homes for trafficked victims in Tucson, and that's something we're going to talk about is unemployment and housing as well. Thanks for bringing that up, Terry. The need there is still great for housing. Barb shared with the group, I have never heard of or thought about human trafficking until meeting Sarah, and my eyes are being opened. Thanks, Barbara. Awesome. Good thoughts, everybody. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much for sharing. So we're going to look at another graphic provided to us from the Polaris Project, which indicates the age at time sex or labor trafficking began. So this dark blue line indicates for sex trafficking, and then the lighter blue line is labor trafficking. And comparing the research that comes out year to year from the Polaris Project, we noticed that the average time of sex trafficking decreased from 19 years old to 17 years old within the recent years. And for labor trafficking, it decreased from 23 years old to now 22 years old. And I would say that this is much more reflective of what we are hearing as kind of the folks on the ground, or the ones who are, really communicating with other stakeholders. This is really occurring for folks younger and younger ages. For the research to now indicate that it's not adults that are first getting into sex trafficking, but they really are starting as children. And that is much more indicative of what we are seeing. I think that we would even argue that it's probably younger than 17 years old, but this is just what the research is telling us right now. Does anything else stand out to anybody, or any comments you would like to share?
Yes, but I'm typing a story word. I'm typing a message, a comment to the message thing regarding the chart seems to show where these cases are, where they're located or where they're detected by law enforcement. But if a lot of people are smuggled across the Arizona-Mexican border, which we know they are, and they end up involved being sexually trafficked, if it's only detected, let's say when they get to New York, the statistic may not show up there here, but actually the problem may originate here, or at least a part of the process originates through the illegal entry process. Would that sound correct to you?
Yeah, I would say that sounds correct to us. We only know what is reported either by community members, which is why we really encourage everyone to be educated on this topic, or what is reported by law enforcement, hospital staff. We know that victims are having contact with people in our society, and so it's just a matter of someone making that report. So yeah, if maybe the trafficking began in Arizona, but then they were brought to New York, and then that's when the report was made, we have very limited information about maybe what all occurred and how many times they were trafficked, who the perpetrators are. Absolutely.
And I greatly appreciate that comment, and I will be contacting you later after this interview is done, because I'm in a long-term research project as a political activist dealing with this specific issue. And coincidentally, for many years, I lived in North Africa and actually met people who were slaves there. Slaves in the literal sense of that they were bought and sold for labor and so forth, and spent time along what was known as the Moroccan gold and slave trade of the Middle Ages. So I have a history and a background in it, which is not relevant to right now, but I will be contacting you in the immediate future regarding these issues.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Roy. Thank you for sharing that experience.
Yeah.
Something that I like to note on this slide, oftentimes we get asked, or people would assume that the age that trafficking began. People often say, well, I'm not surprised to see that it's children. Oftentimes children in a difficult situation, whether that be financial constraints, instability in the home, things like that, might make the choice to join a trafficker, perhaps unbeknownst to them that it's a trafficker, but they may be willing to leave the home. But if you look at this chart, we actually see representation of the age when trafficking began, all the way up to 48 plus years of age. So this really does span all age groups. This is not just a teenager issue. This is not a young adult issue. This is truly an issue across all ages. And the same thing that always sticks out to me year after year, we see the same trend. If you look at the blue line for sex trafficking, you see a spike at age 0 to 8. So when you think about the age at which trafficking began, a 0 to 8-year-old is going to be most likely in a home, whether that be with their biological family, adoptive family, or perhaps in like an orphanage situation. That really tells us a lot about the adults that they're interacting with and how they get brought into trafficking. A 0 to 8-year-old is not necessarily going to make that decision for themselves. So oftentimes that tells us a lot about the environment that they're brought up in.
We also have the top 5 risk factors for trafficking victimization broken down for sex trafficking as well as labor trafficking. And then with, again, kind of the newer research coming out, this indicates that substance use and runaway homeless youth have actually increased in their vulnerabilities and risk factor. So those used to be lower on this list, and now they're the top 2. For labor trafficking, we see overwhelmingly the vulnerability of recent migration or relocation puts them at risk for trafficking victimization. Are there any comments or thoughts from the group? Or I'm also curious, what are the patterns that we're seeing among these groups of folks that are at the highest risk for trafficking victimization?
Mm-hmm. From Donna, I attended the abolition conference in 2012 at U of A. I have not seen much increase in knowledge of human trafficking in 8 years. In fact, trafficking has gotten worse in my opinion. Most people continue to keep their blinders on. Personally, I report many suspect businesses to Polaris, but it's a drop in an ocean. Thank you for sharing that, Donna. We're going to talk about utilization of that hotline and how we report, what you should report, those types of items. So I'm really glad to hear that you are making those reports. Thanks for sharing that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Joan, I see your hand.
I see a pattern here of flight. People are fleeing. Yes. All across the board, they are fleeing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, instability, right, is a very strong pattern, a very strong indicator of high risk.
Right. From Terry, I see substance abuse high and no stable place to live.
Again, this common motif of instability. And we like to, think about this for a minute and sit on this for a minute, because we all are in, different areas of work. We all have, bring a different perspective to this webinar today. And so I just like us to think about, what could we be doing as personal individuals in our society or as the greater Tucson community to diminish this risk of instability for these individuals, since we know that it puts them at such a high risk for trafficking.
Right. Ashley has a comment for the group. She says, I feel desperation seems to be a common theme as well. Absolutely. What we hear from survivors is that oftentimes they're brought into trafficking because they had no other choice, whether that be they were forcefully brought into it, they needed housing, they needed money, they needed food, they were addicted to substances and needed to get a substance in order to survive. And so absolutely, desperation is a huge risk factor.
Mm-hmm. And just to touch on Dr. Sepowitz's research that she found regarding Southern Arizona, she was surveying homeless youth in our area, and they did not call themselves victims of trafficking. They referred to their choice to exchange sex for a place to live or food or clothing or money. They referred to it as survival sex. that this is truly just what they needed to do to survive. And so we thought that was extremely interesting and totally aligns with your comment about this, a situation of desperation. What am I going to do? I know I can sell my body, and there are people that are willing to purchase it.
Yeah, good thoughts, everybody.
Yeah, great. Thank you. This next slide has a lot going on, but we just felt like this was a lot of really important information, so we can spend a little bit of time here. But this top part is talking about the recruitment tactics. So how are people recruited into these types of trafficking situations? And then the bottom portion is the top 5 forms of the force, fraud, and coercion. So I know force, fraud, and coercion are such big terms. So we like that this breaks down of like, what does this look like? How is this being implemented for these individuals?
Something that stands out to me, Maggie, that I like to bring up, recruitment tactics, familial being a recruitment tactic.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when the movie Taken came out, and, you know, everyone talking about human trafficking or, you know, sex trafficking, and how, oh my goodness, if you travel across the country, you're going to be kidnapped by a stranger and brought into trafficking. Now, that's not to say that that does not happen, but what we do like to do is break down that myth that trafficking only occurs overseas, trafficking only occurs with strangers, trafficking only occurs with people involved with drugs, right? What we're seeing here for sex trafficking is that the second highest recruitment tactic is family. Families selling their children into sex trafficking, partners selling their partners into sex trafficking, being brought in by somebody in your familial group. Like I say, whether that's biological, adoptive, or other forms of familial groups. It's pretty alarming. It's pretty alarming. And it's something that I like to just kind of pause on and have people reflect on when we get to this slide.
Mm-hmm. And familial is also a recruitment tactic for labor trafficking as well. So it's not exclusive to sex trafficking. And then the other point I wanted to mention as well is that for labor trafficking, the #1 form of coercion in this case would be withholding pay and earnings. This is particularly applicable when we're thinking about 2020 and all that we've gone through so far this year, which obviously we'll go into more detail, but just keeping that in mind, that if this is puts people at a very high risk of trafficking, and currently we are in crises, many crises. So how is that impacting the victimization of labor trafficking today? Okay, so we are going to share a video that is actually from Dr. Phil. And it's a short clip, and it just shares a story of a teenager who was just posting on social media, made a simple comment, and how that led to her trafficking victimization, and how quickly it led to a trafficking victimization. Optimized sound. Sarah, if you don't mind, just give me a thumbs up that you can hear it when I press play.
Sure.
When my daughter Hope was young, she was a straight A student.
I was a normal, regular kid. I loved to do theater. I loved soccer and cheerleading.
Hope was filled with innocence, joy, and ambition.
When I was 14, my whole life changed.
My daughter Hope was kidnapped by sex traffickers. Hope was forced into prostitution.
It all started because I posted on a social media site that I hated my mother. A woman messaged me back telling me that I could go stay with her and we'd go partying. She showed up within the next 45 minutes and I was gone.
The suspects target girls who post comments about a negative home life on social media sites and chat rooms.
The 14-year-old, oh, I hate my mom. She doesn't understand me. I can't wait to get out of here.
That's how police say William Jacobs and Shayla Williams met a young North Texas victim who was just 14 years old.
I walked into the motel room. I see a man sitting in the corner. The first thing that came out of his mouth was, "Take off your clothes so we can take these pictures." And I'm like, no, I'm not gonna take my clothes off. He said, "So you wanna do this the hard way?" He hit me a couple times, and after that I was out like a light. I woke up in the closet. The closet that I was in was about the size of me right here. After they took me out the closet, they took crushed up pills and they forced them down my throat. After they force fed me pills, I would try to move my body, but I couldn't pick myself up. They made me feel catatonic. After they drugged me, I had my first client.
Hope says she knew if she wanted to make it, she had to find a way to cope.
In order to survive my kidnapping, I had to create an alter ego. They told me that my name wasn't Hope anymore, it was Sophia. So that's the name that I took on. Sophia is the girl that walks with her head high. She was the one who dealt with all the clients and the Johns and the beatings. When I was with the traffickers, they never fed me. My source of food would be picking it out of the trash, drinking the water from the faucet. I bit my nails a lot. One time I was taking a shower and he busted it open and beat me with the belt because I locked the door.
The couple is accused of trafficking the teen in 8 different states in only a 3-week period.
The traffickers made me sleep with men in each state, over 20 men a day. I could never be Hope again after that. I was never going to be the same girl.
Hope's mother says,
So we'll stop it there because then it talks a little bit more about the relationship with the mother. Would anyone have any comments, thoughts, reactions to Hope's story? Is anyone surprised, or is this kind of what you think about when you think of trafficking, how it all works out?
Actually, I'm struck by the horror of it, absolute horror of it.
Yeah. To Donna, she asks, why not go after the customers?
So this is where laws are extremely important. The ways that law enforcement is able to or chooses to prosecute whom, right, in this situation. There are many players in a trafficking scenario, and historically, and they even use the word prostitution in this video, but what we know is that there is absolutely no way that Hope could be called a prostitute because she's under the age of 18. She is being forced to engage in these activities. And so I point that out because for a long time in our country's history, we looked at the victims as the problem. And they were the ones who were considered to be at fault when caught in a situation like this. So it was actually the victims who were arrested to be like, it's illegal prostitution's illegal. So you're arrested. You probably have drugs on you because we know that a lot of these things go hand in hand, just as Hope's story depicts. So maybe they get an additional charge for that. And the buyers of sex would receive a slap on the wrist, say, go home to your wife. And that's kind of how this was managed. And it's really within the last 10 years that there has been an increase in education and implementation of these federal laws to ensure that the victims are treated as such and seen as such, and the traffickers and the Johns or the buyers are handled in the appropriate manner. Mm-hmm. So it definitely is, I think, a dialogue that we've continued to have and continue to need to push for within our policies.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, Maggie. Joan had asked earlier about, Tucson specific instances. In 2019, we partnered with an organization called Operation 13-2 to provide education to folks in group homes. So typically teens living in group homes. And we shared this video and we're talking about social media safety and online presence safety. And there was an individual, this is here in Tucson, that said, wow, they really just posted something and someone started talking to them. It was that easy. And we said, yeah, it is that easy. It can be pretty scary. She goes, yeah, it can. I think it's happening right now. And she turned her phone around and she was having a conversation with a gentleman that she did not know, who was offering to bring her an iPhone. She made a complaint about not having, the newest iPhone to be able to talk with her friends. And Maggie and I stopped the presentation to say, we got to address this. We'll come back to this presentation in a minute. And we were able to intervene and, safely kind of cut off that relationship. But this is how quickly it happens, right? And we talked to her a lot afterwards and kind of debriefed with her and said, you know, when someone is offering to give you something that you don't know, oftentimes there's other motives at play. And we asked her, we said, were you planning to meet with this individual to get this phone? And she said, yes, I was. So that's not to say that, you know, that it was a confirmed trafficking case, but Maggie and I have reason to believe with information like this that we could have interfered, thankfully, in this young girl's life.
I also, oh, Joan, I see your hand. I'm sorry, I don't want to ignore you.
No, that's okay if you need to say something. I was going to ask, what does Tucson do with the Johns?
Yeah, I don't think that we have, I'm trying to think of like the most up-to-date laws that I've read.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we've tried a couple, what's the word I want to use? Like unconventional approaches.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's trying to, I guess where I'm trying to go with this is I think people are throughout the country trying to decide the best way to manage Johns. Is it jail time? Is it, we're going to post your picture in the newspaper? Is it, we're going to contact your family and let them know about this? What is an effective punishment? Because this has been going on for so long and continues to go on. So it is so ingrained, unfortunately. You know, you think about how we've, you know, in our country, we have a history of brothels and how that was kind of an accepted form for men. And so it's really like just a huge shift in the way that our society views this behavior and can curb it successfully with laws and policies. So I'm racking my brain. I can't think off the top of my head exactly where Tucson's stance is at this moment, but I absolutely can find out and get back to you, Joan. I'd be happy to do that.
I just wondered if the culture of the police department here in Tucson or in Pima County was to go after the Johns.
Yeah, in years past, SAAS used to partner with the police department one night a year. It was called Project Raise. And in that night alone, we were given the opportunity, as well as some other resources, to not prosecute prostitutes, as they were called at the time, or Johns. Rather, we brought them to basically a gymnasium and counseled them and talked to them about, you know, how did you get into this situation? Are you safe in your situation? Do you want to continue in this situation, or can we provide you resources to get out? We did that several years in a row up until about 2015, and that project concluded at that time. So where I would love to say that I think we were moving in the right direction to kind of explore different means of, you know, persecuting folks, I don't think that we are. I think we're at a place where we are going back to kind of the old school model of if you catch somebody in the act, we arrest them and we prosecute them. Terry has a comment on this. She says, yes, it is. They have to get the cooperation from the victim, and many times the victims are too traumatized to press charges. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And it is, again, this is why it's such a complex issue, because the idea of having a victim who maybe for a long period of time, maybe still to this day, believed that this was her boyfriend, that they were in a relationship, that he loved her, she was doing this because it was her contribution to the relationship, and then has, you know, the courage to go to law enforcement, someone who the victim has more than likely been trained to not trust and to run away from and to not believe, and now maybe even sit on a stand and testify against her trafficker. Is terrifying. I mean, testifying in and of itself is terrifying, let alone in this particular situation. So just the whole system of how convictions get made for these types of crimes is really not centered around the victim and promoting their safety and security and empowerment, unfortunately. I will say also that at the last Human Trafficking Summit that I went to in Phoenix, and so I think this was last year at this point, our law enforcement, one of our law enforcement directors had stood up to say, like, at this point, unfortunately, we just really don't have the funds to focus a whole lot of attention on human trafficking. And that was, I mean, heartbreaking to hear, right? Like, I was like, I can't believe they just said that at a forum for human trafficking, but it was honest. And if the funds aren't there, their hands are tied. And so that's a huge disservice for our Tucson community at this time. Great conversation, everybody. Thank you so much for all of your comments and thoughts.
Okay, so we promised y'all that we would talk about 2020. So the last few slides were just to give you a foundation of human trafficking and catch anybody that isn't too familiar with human trafficking up on some of our laws, definitions, things like that. So we're gonna really shift our focus and speak specifically about this year because there's a lot of really interesting things going on, and the intersectionality of all of these things with human trafficking is so astounding that Maggie and I want to spend the rest of the presentation really talking about this. So we have a timeline here that Maggie and I put together. You all have lived through this year with us, so you know we could have 45 bullet points of important events that have happened this year. But these couple of bullet points are going to lead into our next couple of slides of discussion. So we want to just hop through these and then really dive into some different discussion topics. Something important that we want to note is some of these items may be triggering. They may be topics that we have folks that believe different things on. We're not here to discuss whether or not we agree or disagree with these events. We're here to discuss how these events are impacting human trafficking. So we would love to hear your thoughts. Of course, we still want participation, but if we do get off topic and off track, if someone has really passionate thoughts, that's something that we might ask to talk about offline, okay? So Maggie, you wanna kick us off?
Yeah, and I also just want to add that, you know, the visceral reactions that some of us may feel when these topics are brought up, we want to channel that to how do we manage this? How do we bring that passion to combat trafficking because of the intersectionality in all of these events that have occurred? So we like it. We like the fire. We like the passion. So this year started out with a bang. January 1st, the Chinese government announced respiratory illness outbreak, which we now know to be COVID-19. At this time, America was not super on board or knowing what was going on. This didn't occur for us until later, but it started the first of the year that an outbreak of illness began.
Yes. Leading us to mid-March. And a lot of things happened in between January and mid-March, but in mid-March, this is where we really see America's reaction to COVID-19. Major sport and entertainment industry and schools shut down. I remember hearing the term abundance of caution a lot in mid-March, and it shifted from we're doing this for an abundance of caution to we're doing this for our immediate safety. So this is when we really start to see these things shut down. And I want to just pause on the school shutdown. That impacted so many things, but perhaps the most important thing that it impacted was that it shifted our children to be online more frequently. So what that means is we discuss social media, we discuss the risks of social media, especially with our vulnerable children, and it shifted us from having, you know, some social media presence at night, after school, things like that, to all day. Now our children are online all day. And it's something that will impact, and you'll see in the next couple of slides, how human trafficking occurs in our society in 2020. The next point that we have here, COVID-19, President Trump declares a national emergency. So this really kicks off the next couple of months of major events that have happened in our country.
So then in April, 1 million cases of COVID-19 worldwide are confirmed. And this is huge for many reasons. We have 1 million individuals who are sick, who are experiencing an illness. They are not working. Companies are shutting down because of this, and 6.6 million workers in America alone file for unemployment. So it is an economic devastation. And what we know from prior slides is that trafficking thrives in devastation, uncertainty, and instability, economic crisis. So those are very much linked, and we'll talk more about how.
Okay, May 25th, 2020, protests against police brutality and racial injustice began occurring throughout the US. And again, we're not here to discuss whether or not we agree with the protests that occurred. What we are here to say is in May, we saw a spark light in folks. Folks were beginning to talk about race. Folks were beginning to talk about where do I fall in this? Where do my brothers and sisters, my neighbors, my coworkers, how does this impact them? And we'll see in a couple of slides, race is a very important piece of human trafficking. It affects those in minority groups at a much higher rate than those in majority groups. So again, we're hearing about race, we're talking about race, and race is an important piece of human trafficking. So we'll get to that in the next couple of slides.
And then July, just a few months ago, Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested for allegations of sex trafficking. I don't know how familiar our group today is with Jeffrey Epstein and his arrest that occurred for the sex trafficking ring that he facilitated throughout America and throughout the world, actually, allegations of sex trafficking by his hand occurring across the globe. And he was arrested about a year ago, and he was not actually tried for these cases due to an accidental death that occurred during his imprisonment. So Ghislaine Maxwell is kind of his second hand, and she was just arrested a couple months ago. And so we bring up this point because, you know, for the first time, people in positions of power are being held responsible for their contributions of sex trafficking. And this is a shift in the right direction, but it also tells us that this is likely, and you know, I can't say likely even, that this is occurring at even a larger global scale than maybe people cared to admit previously. So this term of interconnected pandemics, I'm sorry, Sarah, were you going to take this slide? I just get so passionate.
No, please, but I do want to pause. Roy, did you have a statement or question?
Oh, no, not at all. But I do have a comment, but I think it's best made to you folks as an organization outside of this forum here, because I want to keep you on point. But there is so much information I need to get to you that I think you'll be very happy to have. Actually, maybe very disturbed to have, but nonetheless very relevant to this issue.
Yeah, thank you so much. We would love to talk with you offline, Roy. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
So this term of interconnected pandemics continued to surface during our research and creating this presentation. We just feel like that is such an accurate depiction of what is currently going on. We use this term of intersectionality when we talk about these points in human trafficking, but really they're interconnected pandemics at this point. The Council of Foreign Relations has put out several really good articles recently. I totally recommend looking them up. And one of them is that COVID-19 pandemic has devastated human lives, the global economy, and educational systems. Again, we're just seeing this intersectionality of all of this current devastation going on just within 2020 in and of itself. So to just go back to social media and how that impacts our children today, how it impacts their risk of human trafficking, we are all socially isolated at this point. Children who were once going to school, meeting with their friends, teachers, counselors, all the people that were positive supports in their lives, they are now at home, some of them with families, some of them not with families because families are needing to work or attend to other tasks. And so we see our youth are turning to social media, social isolation leading to turning to social media. And the Council of Foreign Relations is quoted to say, since the onset of this pandemic, there has been a significant increase in the number of graphic, sexual imagery, including images of children being sexually abused at home. And this is totally in line with what our research tells us as far as familial relationships, putting people at risk or getting them involved in a human trafficking scenario. So again, we want to try to break the mold of maybe what you initially think of when you think of human trafficking, but this could be parents needing money. We're in a financial crisis. Their children are at home. They're feeling desperate. Let me take some sexual images of these children and post them for money, post them for trade, wherever they need to fill this moment of desperation. So the social media platforms that traffickers are targeting youth who are sitting online at the computer all day long. We have Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. YOLO is new to me, but it says that it just kind of mirrors Snapchat. And then this one, Lemon, is an online chat site, is literally how it's advertised. So we have several social media platforms that our youth are on, and traffickers know that. Again, they're smart, they're strategic, and they're saying what they need to say to fill this void of isolation at this time. The next point gets into the topic of race, and we titled this Unclear but Undeniable. And the reason this is unclear is simply because of the dearth of research. We wish that we had more research, better stats and figures as it relates to all aspects of human trafficking, but race as well. And unfortunately, when some of this information is gathered on victims, race is just not a question that they ask. So it's not as clear as I think we would like it to be, but without a doubt, it's undeniable. And we have a couple case studies to illustrate the risk that is posed to people of color. So in the state of Louisiana, African-American girls account for 49% of child sex trafficking victims, 49%, but only make up 19% of the state's youth population. That's a staggering figure. And then we see this again echoed in King County, Washington, where 84% of child sex trafficking victims are Black, but only 7% of the general population is Black. This just affirms the need to have conversations about race, to not be overlooking this topic, because people of color are abundantly at higher risk in trafficking scenarios, and we can't be ignoring that.
Any comments from the team on this? Any thoughts on these statistics? Okay, from Vic, does it tie to income? That's a really great question, Vic. We are going to speak about income in just a moment here, and specifically about like unemployment and how that's impacted trafficking. Maggie and I, from our research, our gut feeling tells us yes, absolutely, it has to deal with economics. Again, when we look at all of the risk factors from those first couple of slides, we know that a lot of those risk factors impact minority populations at a greater rate than it impacts majority populations. And that what we also know, and again, we're going to get to this in just a moment, is that the resources available are also greatly available to folks that are in majority groups. Folks that are in minority groups might not have access to some of the resources that could help them get out of financial insecurity, housing insecurity, things like that. Great statement.
Mm-hmm. I know that I was also asking myself even this morning, and again, Sarah was like, okay, Maggie, like we gotta slow down because there's just so much information. This is just so much going on, right? This is a very complex issue. But this morning I was even reading an article, because after reading this slide, I'm like, why? You know, like, why is this? This is staggering. Why is this? And this was not a scholarly article, but it was kind of like a public opinion saying that the hypersexuality of minority female youth is likely a contributing factor to these numbers. And so just the way, again, how has our society in the past viewed sexuality of minority females versus majority females, and how do we promote that sexuality or exploitation of sexuality in the media, in our schools, in pornography? These are uncomfortable topics to be talking about, but the way that our society discusses sexuality and has these conversations about safety impacts our youth. And so then again, we see when we look at COVID-19 as an illness is discriminating. Okay, so human trafficking and the COVID-19 pandemic have something in common. Both take advantage of those most affected by the inequalities prevalent in our society. People of color, particularly Latinos and African Americans, are becoming infected with the virus 3 times the rate of their white neighbors. Black and Latino workers are nearly 2 times more likely to hold service production jobs requiring physical presence at work. And then we also have the contributing factor of limited access to healthcare. So not only are people of color at higher risk of human trafficking, child sex trafficking, but we also see them at a higher risk of becoming sick during this time, of having to go to jobs in person, of being in a financial situation where losing an income in the home due to shutdowns is devastating. And so again, we go back to those risk factors for labor trafficking, and what are people doing out of this desperation? How are they making ends meet for their families? Something that Sarah and I read is that this idea of sextortion, which is trading sex to pay your bills or to pay rent, has increased across the Fair Housing Alliance reports that we've seen within recent months. Landlords are saying, yeah, you know, you can stay here, but you know, you'll do this and this and this. So being in this position of desperation, of instability, and having to make choices that we probably wouldn't normally make because of the current interconnected pandemics.
And something I really love about this slide is it talks about service and production jobs requiring that physical presence. We talk a lot about how we have adjusted during COVID-19, how we've adjusted during 2020. I'm very fortunate to work full-time. This is my part-time gig with Southern Arizona Against Slavery, but full-time I work in a medical industry. And we have seen, of course, an increase in that need. My workload has increased exponentially since COVID-19 hit. And that's a blessing this year, right? There are a lot of people that either had to have a physical presence at work, they could not telehealth, they could not telecommute, or we see folks that were laid off due to the pandemic. And when you're laid off and you have no further income, you make decisions based on that. Yes, people are trying to find work. Yes, people are trying to find jobs. They're looking at unemployment benefits and things that they can attain. But I don't think we can overstate the importance of when people need money, when people need financial stability for themselves, from their families, for their communities, they're going to make choices to make that happen.
Any additional comments or questions? Any thoughts that people are having with these topics? I'm just curious, has anyone thought of all of these interconnected pandemics, just to continue using that term, but these interconnected ideas and how one has affected the other over and over again during this current situation? Joan?
I mean, I don't want this to be a politically incorrect statement, but this is the evidence of a systemic racist problem in this country. All of this. It keeps rising to the surface.
Yeah, I thank you for those thoughts, Joan. We discussed earlier that there are going to be topics that people feel really passionately about, and I can tell this is one of those for you, Joan. So thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. Race is important. It's an important thing to discuss. The fact of the matter is, these pure facts is that race impacts human trafficking. Those that are in minority groups are trafficked at a greater rate. So I think you're right. It's something that we don't want to shy away from. Maggie and I, when we were putting this presentation together, said, man, we're making some pretty bold statements here. But when bold statements are rooted in fact, we feel confident doing it. So thank you so much for sharing that thought. Mm-hmm. Vic shared in the chat box, no, he has not thought about it, but it sure does make sense. Thank you for sharing that as well. Again, putting this presentation together, there's a lot of things that in our years with Southern Arizona Against Slavery, Maggie and I feel, but reading these most recent articles from 2020 really just solidify a lot of the feelings that we have. We try to make our presentations purely fact, purely statistic based. We don't want to put in anything that is not factual. So being able to share these statistics, these numbers, these figures has been really powerful for us. Mm-hmm. Ashley shares in the chat box, I think about this a lot being a minority. Thank you, Ashley, for sharing that. Yeah, those of us that are in minority groups, those of us that can read these slides and think, man, this is my life, this is my family, this is my community. I think it hits us in a different way. So thank you so much for sharing that. Okay, let's talk pop culture. We put up some names here, we put up some stats, we put up some statements here, and we just want to kind of spitball some of these items because these are all things that have come to the forefront of our social media, of our online presence in the year 2020, so we just want to address them head on. We spoke a little bit earlier about Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. There's a documentary on Netflix called Filthy Rich. I would love to say, please go watch it. It's fantastic. And it is, but it's also heart-wrenching and upsetting. So I would just put that disclaimer up there. If you're going to watch it, be in a good headspace to watch it because it is a very upsetting documentary. But platforms such as Netflix, Hulu, HBO are putting up these really bold documentaries right now illustrating human trafficking. To Joan's point, I think that in recent years, we've seen kind of a backslide of discussions of human trafficking. That can be a lot of different things. A lot of times folks talk about secondary trauma and folks getting exhaustion from it, getting fatigue from it. But I think people are starting to get that momentum back, perhaps because we are isolated at home and people have the time to really, watch and think about these different issues. So like I said, Filthy Rich, an incredible documentary that just illustrates the whole community, whole culture, statewide, global way that power, money, positions of power can give people access to this underground ring of human trafficking. And I think people are being brought to justice, which I'm happy about. I think people are starting to talk, which I'm happy about. And to go along with that, Harvey Weinstein, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, is now in the headlines for accusations of human trafficking. And I'm excited as a researcher, as somebody who's passionate about human trafficking, to see where this goes. We know there are facts out there that people in positions of power have access to this because they are safe behind their money, because they are safe behind their positions of power. But along with the Me Too movement that occurred a few years ago, people are beginning to talk, and I think that's fantastic. I mentioned here documentaries. At the end of our presentation, we give you a few different documentaries to watch, so I won't spoil it here, but there are really well done documentaries about human trafficking, both in America and globally, that you have access to at your fingertips. If you have Netflix, if you have HBO, if you have Hulu, you can access these. And Maggie and I find that it's a really easy way to start the discussion of trafficking. It sounds like a lot of you are very involved with human trafficking efforts, which I applaud you for. But some folks that are not yet involved, it can be easier to digest it first through a documentary than to jump into discussions that people might not be ready for yet. Roy has a comment here. There are very powerful economic and political establishment forces, including what I term the law enforcement, criminal justice, prison industrial complex, which benefit from the expansion and continuation of this problem. Absolutely. Anytime that you have groups of people in power, we see that power being mishandled. And I think especially with human trafficking, this is something that's coming to light, and people are not willing to be quiet about it anymore. These next two items listed here, I'm gonna just gloss over pretty quickly. Again, bold statements, but something that we wanna bring to the table because we at SAAS have been asked about them. So we don't wanna shy away from difficult conversations. We want to bring them to the forefront so it gets folks thinking, it gets folks interested in learning more. So for those of you that don't know, there was a troll doll that was recently brought to market. It was a doll that was marketed as something that if you press the belly, it would sing, make comments, something pretty common that we have seen in children's dolls for many decades. What it did not mention was a button placed in a private part. And this button, when you pressed it, would make the doll make noises. Some people described it as moaning noises or noises of sexual excitement. And mothers and fathers that were buying these for their children were saying, where did this come from? Why was this not marketed? And why was it built this way? And as these stories surfaced, the families found that this doll was pulled from market and nobody is discussing it anymore. So it appears that a doll was made and distributed, worldwide, and maybe unbeknownst to the creators, we're not sure, but this doll has some pretty suggestive material in it, and it's something that people are asking the question, why, how do we stop this? How do we prevent this from happening again? So if you don't know what I'm talking about, make note now, troll doll, and you can do your own research on how this came to be and what folks are asking of the makers of this doll. And then lastly, diagnosis. One question that we get asked about a lot, and I think it's been brought up already in this presentation, is what happens to Johns? What happens to perpetrators of this crime? What are we doing with them? How are we educating folks? How are we prosecuting folks? And you may have heard recently, there's been discussions about folks that are labeled as pedophilia. And there has been discussion about, do we make this a diagnosis? Do we put this on the spectrum of sexual orientation? What do we do with these folks? So again, a very polarizing issue. Certainly, people feel very strongly one way or another, but we like to not shy away from it. We encourage you, if you have not heard about this yet, to look up and do your own research on pedophilia and what is happening in 2020 with how they want to treat folks that are identifying this. That's a lot of information about pop culture. Does anyone have any statements or questions about any of the items listed here?
My thoughts on this slide is it's so much information. You know, I feel like every time I read this slide, it kind of takes me aback a little bit, but it really just demonstrates how sexuality and trafficking and these areas that we're discussing today permeate through every facet of our society. You know, we're talking about Hollywood, we're talking about toys, we're talking about mental health. These are all interconnected. Again, we're just such a complex web when we're talking about human trafficking. And this is just why, again, we as community members, even if we're in this field or not in this field, should be having these conversations, should be making sure that we know what's going on and are just aware of what is being presented to us, as well as our children, the folks that we're working with, and how it impacts their vulnerability. Just to bring a little bit of light to a heavier slide, that not everything sucks right now. We say that, you know, with a little bit of lightheartedness, just to kind of break up the mood a little bit, that everything is not all bad. The Human Trafficking Hotline presented or funded by the Polaris Project has come out with recent numbers that demonstrate that there are increases in outreach of victims and concerned community members, actually a 20% increase of contacts made to the Human Trafficking Hotline. And this is important data because this shows that the resources that are being made available to this population are being utilized. So what other resources can we be making available that can be utilized and that can be helping these individuals? We also find, and this is, you know, something that we definitely want to make note of for the people who are directly in this field, that text is overwhelmingly the way that victims or concerned community members are contacting the hotline for help. So as we are brainstorming, how can we be helping? What are effective resources? It seems as though text is a safe and effective way for concerned individuals or individuals in need to receive the help that they would like.
At SAAS, we have a lot of discussion. For those of you who are not in Tucson, you might not know that one of our biggest platforms is to get this number out into our communities. So we have funded through generous sponsorships, billboards, bus stops, bus benches that just blast this number. So in our hopes that it can get to not only folks that work in the field, but also to survivors of trafficking. And this statistic means a lot to me because what it tells us is that survivors and victims are using the hotline more. Survivors and victims are feeling empowered to tell their story, are feeling empowered to get out of this situation. One of our passions is speaking with community members, but one of the things that we always want to keep at the forefront of our mind is we are trying to impact those who have survived trafficking. So we always want to make sure that we are survivor-centered and that that's our priority. And this number gives me a lot of hope that we are reaching them. SAAS, Polaris Project, groups across the nation, we are getting to the people that need to hear the information, and that makes me really happy.
So hopefully at this time in the presentation, if you haven't already kind of felt that fire of passion, momentum of what can I be doing? What can my line of work be doing differently? We want to ensure that everyone feels as though they have tools for their toolbox so that they can step away from this presentation and not just know what's going on, but know what they can do to become a modern day abolitionist, is the phrase that is used among this community, because we are talking about individuals who are enslaved. So the next couple slides will be talking about resources for you all.
Donna has a comment on resources. She states, rest areas are great places for rescue signs in restrooms. I've seen these in a few states. Great comment, Donna. One of the things that we've been trying to get involved with is exactly what you're talking about, rest areas, and then also any transportation hubs. So we've been in communication with Greyhound Bus. We've been in communication with Tucson International Airport, and we are trying to get those resources into safe areas. Like you say here, restrooms are great areas because it may be the only private place available for survivors to be able to reach out. And I also think it speaks to that statistics about text being the most utilized form of communication. When you think about somebody that's in a trafficking situation, if their John is present with them at all times, they're not going to be able to pick up that phone and have a conversation, but they may be able to shoot out a text for communication. So great statement. Rest areas certainly are something that we can utilize more. Thank you.
And just to, again, kind of think about Tucson and what we've seen occur in Tucson at the Royal Room, which is it's like a bar, mini restaurant, charcuterie board. In their bathrooms, they have a little card that says, if you feel unsafe, go to the bar and order some curious drink, and the bartender will take care of the rest. And I know Sarah and I were both just floored when we saw that, because that is, it doesn't say anything. Are you being trafficked? So many questions that we have seen. It's so simple. It's so simple and effective as far as order this drink, we will take care of the rest. And I think that I felt empowered and confident that they would take care of the rest. So we need, keeping those things in mind. We need to know what is effective and can we put it everywhere? Why aren't we putting it everywhere?
Right. Okay, so next up, we want to talk to you about some red flags for sex trafficking. So you're a community member, which means this issue impacts you. Whether or not you work in an industry that directly provides services to survivors of human trafficking, or whether you work at Target, this impacts you because this is a community issue. So we just want to give you some tools to be able to identify potential victims and survivors of human trafficking. With all of these are red flags. This doesn't mean that, certainly if you see this, it's definitely a human trafficking situation, but it might now raise your awareness. If you see this, you might think to yourself, I might want to do some more research or ask some more questions here. So first up, we have if the survivor is with a companion who is noticeably older, dominating, or refuses to leave them alone. I mentioned previously that I work in the medical field, and it is very uncommon during certain medical procedures that another person would come into the room with you. So if I saw somebody noticeably older, kind of speaking for the patient, say, I need to be in the room with them while you're doing this, that might raise suspicion to me to say, I might want to dig a little deeper and ask some deeper questions here. If they have a history of homelessness or chronic running away. In a previous lifetime, I worked at a behavioral health center, and I would do intakes for folks. And one of the questions that we would ask is about their housing and about their recent movement. And if a patient would tell me, oh, I've lived everywhere. Recently, I've been to Washington, California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado in the last 2 years. That could be because of a job, that could be because of family, but that could also be, hey, that's a lot of movement, all kind of in clustered states. That might be something that I ask a couple more questions about. Let's talk about that movement. How often were you moving? How were you transporting from state to state? Things like this. If their clothing is not weather appropriate. I'd like to pass the torch actually over to Skylar, who heard a story from one of our volunteers about seeing a group of girls get out of a van and change clothing. So Skylar, can you speak to that?
Yeah, so one of the people that was at one of our presentations said that She learned about the hotline. She added it to her phone, which is something we commonly ask people to do during a presentation. And she was on the highway headed towards Phoenix and stopped at a gas station. And her sister was going into the bathroom and she was just sitting in the car. And she noticed, you know, one of those white vans, and it pulled up and it had a bunch of girls that were around the same age, but none of them really looked related. They didn't really look like they were like a sports team or anything. And there was an older woman that was there, and she had a bunch of clothes, and she was ripping tags off of clothes and handing out clothes to the girls. So it seemed like something kind of suspicious, like, are these people being moved? Are you trying to change their clothes so that, you know, when they have a report of a missing person, this is what they were last seen in. So she went ahead and called it in, and maybe it was something and maybe it wasn't, but it was great that she was able to be empowered by having that hotline in her phone. So as soon as she saw something, she could call and report it.
Thank you for sharing that. You know, one of the things that we discussed at the end of the presentation is for folks to put in that number. And like Skylar said, thankfully this woman had a number to call. She felt empowered, like, I can make a report, and whether it's nothing or whether it's something, I'm glad that I reported, so that if it is something, something can be done about it. So thank you for sharing that, Skylar. If they have unusual or branding tattoos, we have an image on this slide of initials and a crown. So there are a couple of tattoos that we see a lot with survivors of trafficking. Crowns are very popular, chains are very popular, and unfortunately, branding tattoos are very popular. Some look like barcodes, some might be numbers so that they can track their survivors. And again, it can be difficult because in 2020, it's not uncommon for people to have tattoos, but people that get tattoos out of their own accord will often love to share stories about them. Oh, I got this for my brother, for my mother, for my sister. And if somebody's trying to hide that, or if you notice something like a chain or a number and they don't have a backstory to it, that might be an area where you would want to dig a little bit further. And then finally, untreated STDs or STIs or repeated physical trauma. So again, we're talking about how this impacts multiple different levels. We've given presentations to those working in the medical field, and they'll say to me, you know, well, I don't really think that I come into contact with people that have been trafficked. And my answer is, you have. Whether you know it or not, you have. And some of these issues that may to them just look like a normal issue, like a young girl having an untreated STI. Somebody in a safe situation would typically be able and have the resources to obtain treatment for that. So again, that might be a red flag that you would ask more questions about. Any comments on these red flags? Okay.
We also have an abundance of red flags for labor trafficking. And the reason there are so many, you know, labor trafficking can happen in so many different areas of our society. You know, it's really not limited to, you know, just nail salons or just massage parlors. We know that this happens in hotels, in door-to-door sales. You know, there was recent concern was happening in furniture stores. So it really can be anywhere. And especially with the current pandemic going on, that people in supply chains are trying to find cheaper ways to continue their business and management of their supplies, that we may see people not getting paid sufficiently or being forced to work longer hours than they previously agreed to and things of that nature. So lots of different red flags. I'm not going to read every single one of these, but do any of the red flags stand out to anybody that they would like to discuss further? I know the one that stands out to me is that this idea that they rarely identify as trafficked, instead would just identify as having a bad boss or not liking their job. This is a trend that we consistently see when survivors of labor and sex trafficking are interviewed, is that if you are asking them, oh, how long were you trafficked? Or are you a victim of trafficking? Sometimes the answer is just no, or I don't even know what you're talking about, that is not how they self-identify. So really kind of getting deeper into what was going on for them and their experience, and not labeling them as a trafficking victim is typically the most helpful way to better understand their situation. We want to use the words that the people that we're speaking to use if we're in a position where we're speaking to the victims, but also just keeping that in mind. I think we see more and more advertisements in, major airports saying, are you being trafficked? Have you seen a trafficking victim? And a lot of us don't know what that means exactly. Have I seen a trafficking victim? I don't know. Have I? Or as a person who is being trafficked, if I were to see a sign that says, are you being trafficked? We know from self-report and research that most of these individuals would identify as no and move on from that sign. So we want to ask more specific questions about what is going on in their situations to better serve this population.
Right. Just to bring some light to Tucson, there are two areas where we see labor trafficking a lot. And it's interesting to me that as a society, as a culture, we kind of look down on these two areas. So I just want to bring it to light as something that's happening here in Tucson. The first is forced begging. So here in Tucson, we do have a lot of individuals on our street corners at our traffic lights who will be asking for money, right? Sometimes they have a sign, sometimes they're standing, sometimes they're sitting, sometimes they're in groups, but they will be asking for money at a traffic light. And I can tell you, by living in Tucson for many, many years, the general consensus of the general population is, oh man, look at that poor individual. I feel bad for them, but they did it to themselves. Okay, that's the general consensus. And what we know is that human trafficking, specifically labor trafficking, utilizes that and spins that to say, I want you to go forced beg for me, and nobody's going to ask you any questions because as a society, we look down upon this. So nobody's going to dig any further. Nobody's going to find me out because this is something that's kind of pushed to the side in our society. So forced begging and learning about forced begging is something that I would encourage all of you to do because it is a prominent issue specifically here in Tucson. The second issue that is kind of pushed to the side, specifically here in Southern Arizona, is folks coming up, perhaps from Southern Arizona, perhaps from Mexico, that are looking for construction jobs or manual labor jobs. And again, sometimes they have signs, sometimes they'll be sitting at a construction site looking for work. And again, people aren't asking the difficult questions. People aren't looking to ask anything further because as a general consensus, this is a position that people are frowned upon if they're in the middle of. So again, labor trafficking, I think number one is not discussed as much as it needs to be, as we know that it happens 9 times more frequently. And number two, a lot of the times that people could intervene, they don't because it is a position that is difficult to intervene on or people don't want to talk about it. It's a tough topic to talk about. So just something to think about for those that want to do a little bit more research into labor trafficking. Okay, so speaking with potential victims, so Maggie and I are both social workers by trade, so we speak with victims, both human trafficking and some of the risk factors that we talked about a lot. So we feel really comfortable talking with folks. But for those that are not in the human services industry, you may not feel as comfortable. So this is not to say that you have to be the one to intervene or that you have to ask these difficult questions, but it can be helpful to know kind of where we're coming from and what sorts of questions can be helpful when speaking with somebody. So the first, do you feel safe leaving here with the person you came in with today? So again, really getting to that root issue of maybe you're not being honest with me about who this person is. Maybe you can't be honest with me about who this person is, but asking the direct question, do you feel safe? Where they can give a yes or no answer and you can do an intervention right then and there. Asking them, can you come and go as you please? Letting them know physical movement, being able to leave your house, your place of work, things like that is okay. And if you're not being allowed to do those things, that's something that I'm going to ask more questions about. Again, relating to the tattoo, could you tell me about that tattoo and kind of assessing, are they able to speak about it or is it something that they're not comfortable speaking about? And then digging a little deeper. To Maggie's point, speaking about using the term trafficking with somebody that's being trafficked, that might not be the best terminology to use. So we are often encouraging folks, be as direct as possible. When was the last time someone paid you to have sex with them? There are many professionals out there that will tell you that they ask these questions back to back. Have you ever been trafficked? And the victim will say no. And then they say, have you ever paid or been paid for sex for an item, for housing, for food? And they say, oh yeah, definitely, it just happened last week. So being careful with our language and being sure that we're being specific and using the language that the survivor uses. And then lastly, kind of along those same lines, when was the last time you exchanged sex for money, drugs, housing, transportation, clothes, or food? Again, if you say, have you traded sex for money? They might say no. Have you traded sex for clothing? They might say yes. Have you traded sex to get a drug that you are addicted to? They might say yes. So again, we don't expect anybody that is uncomfortable asking these questions to go out onto the streets and start asking them, but it puts you in a line of thinking where you can understand these are the types of questions that we would want to know, or the types of information that we would want to know in order to intervene.
But we really do want to focus on prevention, right? So prevention is key, and we want to encourage you all to do whatever that you feel comfortable. You know, we're going to give several avenues of ways that we can all be actively working to prevent human trafficking victimization. The first of which is staying informed. So attending trainings like these, watching the documentaries that we've discussed, you know, looking up maybe the items of interest that you didn't know about as we discuss them in this presentation, as they come up in our society with, you know, what, like we were talking about, dolls, Hollywood, mental illnesses, being informed of these topics. We also encourage you to talk to your family, friends, and children. Talking about online safety, what is force, fraud, and coercion, what are appropriate and safe relationships, what as an American citizen or as an undocumented person are their rights in this country. Being educated is empowering for us. And so just really having these conversations to ensure that those around us, our circle of people, are on the same page as us as far as their rights and ensuring their safety. We may be in contact with individuals who have engaged in some of these activities that we've talked about throughout this presentation. And so, you know, just having open conversations, despite how difficult and uncomfortable they may be, really does lead to preventative steps to stop this crime. And then also knowing your resources. So if you are, you know, have a feeling, have a concern, see some red flags, really feeling empowered. We hope that each one of you feels empowered after today's training, that you could call the National Human Trafficking Hotline and report some red flags, or text them to report whatever it is that you're seeing or whatever concerns you have. I would even challenge each one of you now to take out your cell phones and put the National Human Trafficking Hotline phone number in right now. Put the text number in your phone right now. We also have listed the Department of Child Safety, so that's Arizona specific if minors are involved in criminal or unsafe activity. So we have that number listed, but also the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children does phenomenal work if anyone has concerns with children who are homeless, missing, or involved in unsafe activity. And that's throughout our country as well. So if you feel challenged, if you feel, you know, motivated now, please feel free to take out your phone and put these numbers down, because we really believe that each one of us does have the power to take steps towards eradicating modern day slavery.
Absolutely. We have a comment from Autumn. I wonder how much we could uncover if we added those questions in our former slide into our routine assessments and screening in the medical behavioral health fields. I could not agree more, Autumn. Maggie and I have both worked in the behavioral health field, and it's ever evolving, right? So I am not here to say that we, you know, have archaic means of assessing people, right? It's ever evolving, it's ever changing. Behavioral health agencies are open to these questions. One of our most popular presentations was at one of our behavioral health agencies here in Tucson, and it was part of their quarterly orientation process. So behavioral health agencies are totally open to this, but I do think there is some room for improvement. And I do think that if we did add in some of these questions, like you're right, we would uncover a lot more. We would uncover a lot more.
I know that I've spoken to some of our hospitals here, hospital staff in Tucson, and they had said that some questions were beginning to be implemented. And I think even Dr. Sepowitz was doing a research study on this. But I think it really came down to the practitioner's comfort in asking these questions and the way that they ask these questions, that they, Dr. Sepowitz was saying that she truly believed that victims were not being truthful because the practitioner was so uncomfortable. So it is, again, I feel like I keep saying the same things, but so complex. And we really have to be comfortable just asking these questions, having these difficult conversations, because we know without a doubt we're in contact with these victims, especially if we're in the mental health or medical health field. So I totally agree. I think it's just so hard because there's never just one simple solution of like, okay, from now on, just ask a couple more questions. It's like, okay, let's practice it. Let's work on it. Let's believe that this is a really important thing. And let's, again, light that fire and that passion in each one of us to know that we can make these changes.
Yeah. I think too, very similarly, about a decade ago, suicide became a topic that people were willing to talk about, wanting to learn more about, and wanting to ask direct questions. I actually remember the very first time I asked somebody, are you planning to kill yourself? And it was a very difficult question at the time. And now it's just such a part of my vernacular that I've said it dozens of times every day for the last 10 years, that it doesn't seem so scary anymore. And so I hope we're getting into that same place with human trafficking and with selling sex for money, for services. And something that Maggie and I talk about a lot, because when we're doing these presentations with practitioners, they'll ask us like, well, what if I offend somebody? And I say to them, I challenge them and say, if somebody asked you today, have you sold your body recently for money, for food, or for clothing? They look at me and they say, well, no. I'm like, okay, did that offend you that I asked you that? And they're like, well, no. So if it's not happening to somebody, it's not going to offend them. And if it is happening to somebody, it might offend them because they're scared, in which case that's a red flag to note. Or they might say, I'm so glad you asked because I want to talk to somebody about this. So again, we just challenge you to continue to be equipped with these different tools so that you can utilize them in your own life.
And I'm not trying to spend too much time here, but I just think it's so important, again, the way that we ask questions. So if I ask you, you haven't cheated in a while, right? Of course, you're going to say, no, I haven't cheated in a while. If I say, tell me the last time that you cheated on something. Those are two, I'm asking the same question, but in very different ways. One opens a conversation and just assumes the answer is yes, so we can talk about it. And one's like, I don't really want to talk about this. I just have to ask. So we have to do the same thing when we're talking to potential victims. Tell me about the last time that you, needed some clothes, and so maybe you traded sex, versus you've never traded sex for anything. So different, so different.
Okay, so like Maggie said, we love to say, what can I do to become a modern day abolitionist? We feel like that's such a powerful statement, such a bold statement, and really just gives people the permission to say, modern day slavery is an issue that I am unwilling to accept, so I am going to do everything in my power to change it. So of course, we advocate for victim-centered law and policy. We are incredibly fortunate to have a lawyer on our board of directors who is able to decipher some of these laws and policies that come out. His name is Eric. He is not able to be with us today, but he is on our board of directors. So of course, if anyone ever has any questions or needs some extra guidance, he's always willing to help us out. And calling your senators when there are different laws and policies being brought forward. Human trafficking is a bipartisan issue, right? Whether you identify as a Democrat, a Republican, or something else, this is an issue that impacts everybody, and it's important that everybody be talking about it. So we have a very important election season coming up. So again, no matter where you fall, this is an issue that will be impacted by whomever comes in office at every level of office. So we do encourage you to get out and vote, register to vote if you have not already. And we try to equip people with scripts, with talking points so that you can feel comfortable calling your senators. You can find that on our website and on our social media platforms, SAAS Tucson. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We have a website. We have an email address if you feel more comfortable talking to us that way. And then again, just getting involved and donating to organizations. A lot of the folks that are involved with SAAS have been involved for a long time, and we have representation truly from every area. One of our biggest supporters is a local representative, Steve Kozaczyk, who oversees Ward 6, and he's an incredible asset to us as well. So we feel very fortunate to have such a strong presence in the community and to have members helping us in our community. So we encourage you to do the same.
So just a couple of the resources that we've been discussing throughout this presentation, if you did want to write down for your own reference, how many slaves work for you? We actually have a graphic of it, and it's something that we, in a normal presentation that we do, would go through this activity. And it really asks you personal questions about what your closet looks like, how big is your house, how many cars you have, the cosmetics in your bathroom. And it ties to, are there individuals involved in labor trafficking who are creating the products that you own right now in your home. And so at the end, it gives you a total number of how many slaves work for you. And I can say that every single time, everybody is shocked by the number because no one wants to believe that, right? We're here, we're educated, like that is not something that we contribute to. So it's just important for us to be mindful of, again, everything that we're doing and the way that it is interconnected to trafficking. I Am Jane Doe is a documentary that we think was done extremely well, as well as the Jeffrey Epstein Filthy Rich documentary provides a lot of information about current issues. And then just some of the resources that we use today: Trafficking in Persons Report of 2019, the Polaris Project, and the International Justice Mission. In case you wanted to look up any of our resources, we're happy to send you direct links or anything like that that you may want. And that concludes our presentation for today, everybody. We are so thankful for your engagement and for taking the time to join us. If there are any questions, we would love to hang out with you and answer those either as a group, or if people need to sign off, no worries at all. And then I'll just put my contact information, kind of the organization contact information, my name, our email, website, and our social media tagline if you would like that.
Victor says, great job. Thanks, Vic. Thank you. When we were putting these slides together, I tell you, Maggie and I spent probably 6 hours just digging into research and really revamping it for 2020. And we could talk for 24 hours about all of these issues. Maggie and I are personal friends as well as colleagues here. And every time we get together, we're like, did you read this? Did you see this? Have you watched this documentary? You know, we just can't get enough. So if there's any presentations or any material that you're interested in that you would like to learn more about, we're happy to do that research. We are passionate about this. We are nerding out about these issues. So we would love to do any specifics that you have questions about as well.
Mm-hmm. And then, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, we do these for whoever needs presentation. So we are willing to meet you at your house and bring coffee and sit with you and all your best friends and talk about these issues. We can come to your place of work. We can come to your church. We really try to make this information as available as possible. And now with Zoom, we can even host a Zoom session for you and your friends. So if this is something that you were like, oh, I was really hoping this person would come, they need to hear this, please let us know and we'll make this information available to them. We even will cater presentations specifically to the needs of the group. So Joan, I know you were interested in learning more about Tucson specific. We absolutely could do research and find all the information we can Tucson specific and host a presentation regarding that. So we have, you know, very specific requests that do come up, and we can make it shorter, longer, you know, whatever the needs are.
Donna says here, thank you. I'm continuing to spread awareness. Thank you, Donna. That is the end goal, right? Every time we leave a presentation, I say, if we've even impacted one person to put this number into their phone, we've made a difference, right? Just having people be aware of it. I can tell you from all of our presentations over the years, we regularly have people that come to us and say, oh my goodness, because I had this phone number, I made this call. I don't know if it made a difference or not. And we say it certainly did. Even getting reports from people are really important. It's really important for the Polaris Project, for our own collection of information. One of the stories that I like to tell at our groups is one of the first phone calls I made to the Human Trafficking Hotline happened while I was walking my dog here in Tucson. I saw something that I thought was suspicious and I decided to act. And it's something that I'm really proud to share, you know, that I felt comfortable utilizing a resource that I give in presentations all the time to make a report about something that I thought looked strange to me. So we encourage you to do the same. And if you ever do have questions like, hey, I saw this, should I go ahead and turn it in or not? Maggie and I are happy to brainstorm with you. That's always something we're happy to do. Roy has a question. Donation sent to, question mark.
Actually, what I want to do is I'm active in a whole lot of Facebook political groups and so forth. And the name of your organizations come up from time to time. And I want to publish some very specific things, including you guys need to contact these folks and give money to them and help them out. Stop complaining about the problem on Facebook. Roll up the sleeves and do something. There's a difference between complaining about who's responsible and actually doing something to help the poor folks that are caught up in this.
Absolutely. Maggie, do you want to talk about our different platforms for donations?
Yeah, absolutely. The easiest way to donate, Roy, would be if you just go to our website and we have a button kind of right there front and center that says donate, and it's through PayPal. We are a registered 501c3, so all donations are tax deductible. And I don't think we even mentioned this, but everyone on our board is 100% volunteers. So we do this simply because we're passionate about this. So all donations, 100% of donations go to furthering awareness and our mission of eradicating modern day slavery. So just so you know exactly where your money's going. But I'm more than happy to send that link to you directly. We're going to send a follow-up email after this and just ask if people are willing to take like a survey monkey just to hear feedback on how we did, how we can be improving, things of that nature. So if people want the presentation, I'm also happy to add that link. Just trying to meet your needs, whatever you all need.
Yes. And then we do also on social media, we'll occasionally do drives on our Venmo, or most recently we've connected our store, our online store, to our social media account. So I know especially for our younger populations, they're always asking about what gear do you have so I could give it to my friends or family. And we do sell our t-shirts, tank tops, water bottles, pens, we kind of have it all. So if that's something that you're interested in, our Instagram is connected to that store.
And Skylar's wearing one of our t-shirts. Will you
Yes,
model
she
it?
is. Yes, she is.
Can I model it here? It's kind of backwards. Join the fight. We also have these in tanks. And then the back says, can you read it?
It says Southern Arizona Against Slavery. It has our logo, similar to Maggie and our logo here.
It's a very nice shirt, good quality. Love it. Also, I think Joan had a question.
Okay.
Well, my question was not, it's a comment. I just sent a chat to someone I don't know because I don't know how to work chat, but I wanted to thank you. You are all so passionate and articulate, and you just need to keep talking. So,
thank you, Joan. Thank you. And thank you for
whoever I sent the chat to, I apologize. But okay.
That is okay. I have done the same. I have done the same. Perfect.
Any other questions? Any follow-up? Would folks like this slideshow? Would that be helpful?
Whatever you guys are posting on your website will be helpful, because I will attach links to that, to various articles I write on the issue of open borders and the consequences thereof. And I will post in various political groups around the country. So what you already have, I'm sure, will be more than adequate. And I just haven't checked it out yet. I've known about you guys, but today, literally this morning, was the first contact I've had with you to actually see what you guys are doing.
Well, we're so thankful you were able to join, Roy.
Yes.
Thank you.
I was going to say one more thing.
Go ahead, Joan.
I belong to Ollie. None of you look like, maybe Victor, you belong to Ollie, maybe, I'm not sure. But anyway, I've given talks to Ollie on human trafficking, but you could do your primer 101 on just a one-time deal. And I think it would be well received because you've got a PowerPoint that's good and you update it all the time. And so anyway, you might consider that. They've already put together their fall semester, but they have a spring semester and a summer semester, and a lot of one-time deals are well received there. So you might consider that as a way of reaching thousands of us older people in the Tucson area, because this just doesn't apply to young people. It applies to grandparents too.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay. Would I reach out to Ollie directly, Joan, or do you have a contact?
Ollie is I mean, they're associated with the U of A, so I mean, you'd reach out to them as a possible source of a talk or a series of talks.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not sure who the president is anymore because it fluctuates, and now we're all online, so we don't see anybody in person. So,
Thanks,
but
Jen, that's
we
perfect.
represent thousands of the older folks in Tucson.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joan. Autumn has a comment. She says, thank you so much. Amazing presentation. And she would find the PowerPoint helpful, Maggie. So maybe we can add that to our email that goes out. Donna has a comment. She says, polarisproject.org is excellent for resources and reporting. We could not agree more. I would say that the bulk of our information comes from the Polaris Project. And because it's a national organization, we not only get information about Arizona, but how this is affecting our nation as well. So I agree, Donna. Thank you for sharing that. Okay. So if that's all the comments, again, just thank you all so much for your time today. Feel free to reach out to us. Please do add us on social media, write to us on our emails. We will be doing more of these presentations. So thank you all so much, and I hope you have a restful rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.